Hi and welcome back to the channel on the college process. Once again, my name is Ed from Principia Prep, and today we're going to be going over the student loan debt forgiveness and what's likely to end up happening. But if you're new to the channel and are looking for additional college content, before we start, if you would like, please hit the subscription button down below. It will notify you of new videos when they do come out, as well as if you do enjoy today's video, please leave us a comment below and a like. It does help the channel. That being said, let's jump right into today's video, student loan forgiveness and what's likely to end up happening. Now, before we begin, I need everyone to first understand that there's actually technically three different types of student loans out there. So when you're talking about student loan forgiveness, you need to understand this first before you can really understand anything as far as student loan forgiveness actually goes. Right off the bat, we have federal loans, we have state loans, and we also have private loans. Now, when it comes to the three different loans, I can explain to you what each one is and essentially how I think and what's more likely going to end up happening with the loan forgiveness stuff. Now, there's trillions of student loan debt out there. Almost close to $2 trillion is actually out there now between the state, the feds, as well as the private lenders. Now, when it comes to the state loans, they actually have the smallest percentage of student loans out there, with less than 1% of the total student loan debt outstanding being state loans. Mostly because not every state offers state loans to the residents or students going off to that state and studying within that state itself. And because these state loans are limited depending on their budgets and the amount of money they put forward, what you end up seeing is a lot of times, unfortunately, mid-year, the student loans for the state specifically will actually cancel certain programs or not be able to provide anymore for the upcoming academic year, essentially mid-summer, when everyone's looking to pay their bills and establish those student loans. So state loans are typically the smallest amount out there. Now, the second group you have of student loans out there, the second group that actually has the second biggest amount in student loans out there, which is roughly just around 8% of the total student loan debt out there nowadays, is the private lenders. The Sallie Mae's, the SoFi's, Discover's, Citizens Bank, so on and so forth. This is the second biggest group with 8% of the total debt out there for student loans. Now, Sallie Mae, one of the biggest private lenders, has about $25 billion on its own books of student loan debt out there. Now, even with the billions of dollars in private student loan debt that these companies have, the reality is there's still a small portion of the total debt out there. And then you have the number one holder of most, if not all, the debt out there, the federal government, making up about 92% of the total debt out there for student loans, with roughly 43 million borrowers, as well as $1.6 trillion in student loan debt that the federal government has on their books themselves. It breaks down to really two different categories being the bulk of it. Parent plus loans, loans that parents took out in the benefit of paying their students' college education, which are federal loans in the parent's name only, and then the federal direct student loans, which were given to students by filling out the FAFSA form. That's how they were offered to them. And if they took those loans, year one, your student got $5,500 as a freshman. Year two, they got $6,500 as a sophomore. Year three, they got $7,500 as a junior. And year four, their senior year, they got $7,500 as well. So in total loan debt, you're looking at the $5,500 plus the $6,500 plus the $75 and $75. So you're looking at a total potential debt that student can have from the federal government of roughly right around $27,000. Because it's very important that parents understand and students understand, whoever's watching this video, you have three different types of loan groups available out there. And the reality is, good, bad, or indifferent, right off the bat, the federal government's not going to forgive private loan debt and they're not going to forgive student loan state debt. It's just not going to happen. It's very unlikely. So I wanted to explain this for a few reasons. Number one, it's very unlikely if you have state or private loan debt, it's going to be forgiven by the federal government. It's probably not going to happen. So the reality is most of the loan forgiveness is going to happen more than likely on the federal side. Starting, in my opinion, more than likely with the student federal direct debt, then possibly the parent plus, i.e. the parent's federal debt. Now let's talk about what's already happened already, or what's already in place. Right off the bat, since 1995, there's actually already been loan forgiveness for the federal debt, believe it or not. It's just very difficult to accomplish because the problem was, in many cases, to even establish federal loan forgiveness program, you had to go into one of various different income repayment programs. Now, I'm not going to go into every different one because there's multiple of them, and this video would roughly take about an hour and a half to 2 hours just for me to explain to you all the different loan repayment programs from the federal income repayment side. But I'm going to give you the basics here of how the program basically works. So you need to be making an income that was fairly low for it to make sense for you to actually do an income repayment, because many of them require you to pay a certain percentage of your income, typically 10, 15% of your income. So obviously you have higher income, even though you could do an income repayment program, it probably didn't make any sense because you'd be technically paying more on a monthly basis than you would have if you just did a standard repayment, 10-year repayment that most students go on when they start paying back their federal loan debt. So basically you need to be making $40,000 a year or less for the income repayment program to make sense for you guys to be doing. In addition to basically making poverty level income and below, you need to be doing this for anywhere between 20 to 25 years, because each year you have to reapply for the income programs to see if they even make sense for you. So the reality is it took decades and decades for you to even get to the end point where you're able to basically be able to be given the forgiveness on your debt. So in many cases, it doesn't make sense for students to stay on the income repayment programs if they were making more income through their jobs, because their jobs after every year were giving them salary increases and everything else. Obviously, as your income goes up, it's made a lot more sense for many families, many students specifically, just to pay off the debt, to be honest with you. And what made it even more difficult is even if you had your income below that threshold of $40,000 where it made sense for you to do the income repayment programs, and even if you were on the programs for 20 or 25 years, what made it even more difficult was if the agencies helping you through the process or you yourself made any errors, even the slightest error in deferment, forbearance, hardship paperwork, or even sent in the wrong documentation at any point in time, even if it was the slightest mistake, what would typically happen is they would reset your clock and start you back at zero time. So even if you're doing this for 15 years and you made one slight mistake, you could start right back at zero. This is why almost no one has gotten this accomplished. In fact, in just over 25 years, only 32 people have actually gotten their federal loans through the income repayment programs and then forgiven at the end. So we're talking about 32 people in over 40 million people that have debt here. So it's almost impossible. It's almost been impossible to get this forgiveness given from the plan that was put in place back in 1995. And even if you did get accomplished, the worst part about it is all the debt you got forgiven at the end was actually taxed as actual income. So after getting it forgiven, you were hit with a tax bill essentially. So what's the current administration trying to do? Well, it's very simple. They're trying to do one of two things, if not both. One, they're trying to make the process easier of what's already in place now, to make it easier for students to pay a smaller amount of their discretionary income, as well as make it that it's not taxed at the end, whatever loan amount they're forgiven. And the second thing they're trying to do is come up with some kind of policy, some kind of plan where they forgive a certain amount for basically every one of the debt holders out there. Those are the two things they're trying to establish right now. Now, with all that being said, there has been some debt that's already actually been forgiven by the administration. They've actually forgiven $2.8 billion of loans that have already been out there. Here's the federal debt that they've already actually forgiven, the $2.8 billion or so, actually a little bit more, but this is the amount they've forgiven so far. So they're on the right track. Now, I know this here doesn't actually affect everyone watching the video here, but it is going in the right direction. So now I explained to you guys the different loans, and so you have a better idea of what's going to be forgiven and what's probably not going to have any chance of being forgiven, and what's already happened already so far. Let me discuss what I think is going to happen. Now, remember, I've been a college advisor. I've worked in financial aid offices. I've done a bunch of different things, both institutional as well as outside, consulting and everything else. I've been doing this over 20 years, so I have a pretty good idea of what I think is going to end up happening. Right off the bat, those who are hoping for or wishing for the $50,000 forgiveness, everyone's loans forgiveness, it's just not feasible for the federal government to forgive all $1.6 trillion in debt. It's just not possible. The reality is, more than likely, they're going to come up with some kind of compromise, figure something out, either through executive order or through Congress or Senate or whatever you might call it, where they forgive right around that $10,000 number that seems to be the number that they're all kind of agreeing on or thinking that this makes the most sense. So for me, I think that's going to be more likely the level they're going to be forgiving, the $10,000 number. Now, of that $10,000 forgiveness, the reality is the first people they're going to forgive, more than likely, because they're the first in line, will be the students that have the student federal loan debt, that $27,000 I just talked about a moment ago. The students that in freshman year got $5,500, sophomore year $6,500, junior year $7,500, and senior year $7,500. That $27,000, that's where I believe the bulk, if not all the debt will be forgiven, at least some amount, more than likely the $10,000 number I just talked about. The second people in line, I guess the second debtors in line to be able to get assistance through the federal loan forgiveness program that looking to establish essentially is going to be the parents through the Parent Plus loan. These will more likely be the second people in line after the federal direct loan for that student. Now, for example, let's say your student only has, let's say, $5,000 of federal direct loan debt, and you have, let's say, $20,000 in Parent Plus loan debt. What will happen is if they go through with this $10,000 forgiveness, they'll basically erase your student's $5,000 debt that they owe to the federal government through their federal direct loans, and then take the remaining $5,000 and give it to the parents as a forgiveness. Now, there may be some other contingencies in place, like income levels and so on and so forth. You have to be under or hitting and so on and so forth. But very likely, it's probably going to be a $10,000 threshold is what they're going to be able to forgive. And once again, it's going to be the students first, then the parents. So those are looking at so for those who hold private loan student debt or state student loan debt, there very likely is not going to be any forgiveness from the federal government, at least. So that being said, I know a lot of people want more than 10,000. That's totally understandable, but you have to look at it from the perspective of this. In 25 plus years of the income forgiveness programs that forgive the debt after 20 or 25 years of payments, they've only forgiven 32 people's debt out of 40 million people that hold debt. So the reality is they're going in the right direction, because if they do and they are able to give that $10,000 forgiveness to everyone across the board, or at least to a majority of you guys out there, that amount will way surpass what they've given away or helped out with for just those 32 people. So that being said, if you have any comments, any questions, please leave them below down there in the comment section. If you do enjoy today's video, please leave us a like. It does help our channel. And also here on the screen, you see our contact information. So if you have any questions, you have any concerns, please reach out to us. We help out parents with the entire college process, admissions, financial aid forms, consultations on their situation, etc. And other than that, thank you once again for watching. Once again, my name is Ed from Principia Prep.